The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced?
Stop right there!
From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
They let us play with all our toys. They let us think that we're big boys. They let us make a lot of noise, but we ain't rule the world. They let us think we're Superman.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with Bigfoot and aliens again?
Dad, you gotta stop haunting the ghosts. You're scaring them.
All right, seriously, put down the pointy sticks.
Okay! Game on! Game on! Game on!
The password is...
All right.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
Seriously, Dave? Really? Aren't you a little old for a tinfoil hat?
Hello, Toby. Bye-bye. Love you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, just please take your seat about way. We're with you. It's time to take off. Start. 2, 1. Boost ignition and lift off.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. It's great to have you along for the ride on this Thursday, June 1st, Friday, June 2nd. If you're on the East Coast, I hope you had a great day and night as we are live right here in the Great White North in the heart of central British Columbia as we are live 7 days a week. We welcome everyone listening in on our terrestrial radio stations. WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of the Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live at spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and on Revolution Radio. So if you're listening in on the Double R Machine, remember, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Horns up if you like our music, courtesy of our resident guitar god, Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy. Bumblefoot is the official sound of SOR. Now, if you're a social media junkie like I am, a reminder to you, you can follow us on Twitter, at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes. We're also on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, Player.fm, and Stitcher. And, of course, our website is SpacedOutRadio.com. And if you go to Patreon.com for as low as $1 a month, you can become a patron of Spaced Out Radios as well. Now, as you know, we don't take callers on this show. But if you want to take part, I want you to participate. So you got to sign in to one of our chat rooms. Either on our website by clicking Listen Live, you can go on Revolution Radio, on Spreaker, or on the UPRN chat room. Or maybe you're one of the lucky ones on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Or if you're on Twitter, be like Deb and Jeff and use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio to connect with me live during the show as well. Now, if you head to our website for just $5 a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. And right now, as of right now, you can go to the Spaced Out Radio store, pick up a t-shirt, pick up a poster, or an SOR sticker. But we got more on there right now. If you're planning on coming to the Spaced Out Radio first annual Caribou Paracon here in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia, tickets are officially on sale as of today. So make sure you pick up your package. It is 10% off right until July 31st. So make sure you book your tickets early. We have a news section on our website called The Encounter Online, dealing with everything paranormal and strange, courtesy of our editors, Eric Markham and Everett Thiemer. You can also check out my latest blog on there as well, and if you've had an experience you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. The near-death experience is a phenomenon where a person dies, sees the other side, then somehow comes back to their body to tell this extreme story of what they saw over there. Stories of bright lights at the end of a tunnel and the feeling of love, peace, and tranquility everywhere. But of course, some are dark as well. Many in the scientific community believe these experiences are caused by chemical reactions to the dying brain. After all, according to science, we're one and done. We die and we're gone. But is that really the case? Dr. Laurin Bellg began journaling about these miraculous moments several years ago. As the stories mounted, Dr. Bellg started seeing and recording more results. She knew there was a book to be had, written from a professional practitioner. Near Death in the ICU is that book, and Dr. Bellg's book is available right now on Amazon. Within 2 days of the release, it became a #1 bestseller in 3 different categories, as now a 4-time award winner. Dr. Laurin Bellg, we are so proud to have you on Spaced Out Radio tonight. How are you?
Great. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's a real pleasure because, I was brought up in a family of creation. Even though we weren't a religious family per se, Mom grew up very religious in a strict Mennonite family. Dad grew up Ukrainian Orthodox. And we were always taught that there is a God, there is a heaven, there is a hell. If you're good, you go up. If you're bad, you go down. Did you grow up that same way that led you to this, or because you took a more scientific approach to become a doctor, was this something that you had to learn about on your own through the experiences?
Well, certainly my experience as a physician informed my worldview around the human experience. And it is my current view about near-death experience is very much informed by my practice of medicine, and that has really kind of led me on this journey of really exploring this very intriguing part of being human, and that is the near-death experience or even the out-of-body experience. It's not always limited to a death experience.
So when you first started learning about this, did you know about this in childhood? Had you ever heard of it going through high school and college?
No, not at all. In fact, I mean, the Sentinel event, what really got me interested in this was something that happened to me right out of medical school. I mean, I was a brand new intern. I was firmly locked in my left brain, and I had a patient who needed surgery, and he refused because some years earlier he had had an out-of-body experience during surgery where he described up above his body looking down and seeing the surgery being done. He saw his abdomen open. He saw some of his intestine being cut out, and he was terrified. And he said, "I will never have surgery again." And so he refused the life-saving surgery that he needed and died. And that bothered me. I mean, it really haunted me because I didn't know what it was that he had described, and he was confirmed to be under general anesthesia. I reviewed the records, and he was confirmed during that surgery that he described in exquisite detail to be totally unconscious. And that really propelled my journey forward, my curiosity, and I still feel that if I had understood what was going on, I might have had a different conversation with him, and it might have saved his life. So that really, I'm not sure if I had had such a pivotal experience with a patient, if I would be on this journey, but I hold that experience pretty close to my heart.
Growing up, were you someone in a religious family? Did you have paranormal experiences? Was there anything odd, or was that just not part of the forte?
Well, you know, I grew up in a spiritual family, and but it was a very traditional spirituality. It was very biblically based, as a lot of faith traditions are in this country. And it was, you know, it was cultural, but certainly we didn't talk a lot about paranormal phenomenon. It was very metaphoric, I suppose, and had some meaning for me growing up, but I didn't grow up in a family that entertained the possibility of ghosts or near-death experiences or anything paranormal. That's something that my curiosity has expanded to, explore in the past 20 years, really.
So, considering you didn't grow up in a paranormal field, did you ever believe in things like ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, or anything along those lines to try and expand your mind, or were you so focused coming out of high school and getting into medical school that you really didn't have time for that?
Well, it's not that I didn't have time. It just wasn't my focus. I certainly didn't think a lot about it, and now it's something I think a lot about, the mystery of things that we can't see. And I think that, just with any phenomenon, if you are aware of it, you pay attention to it and then you notice. So I certainly have, since I started looking, have noticed things. I mean, we live in an older house and unusual things happen, and I'm not sure I would have noticed that growing up. But I think, just like with anything, if it has your attention, you start to explore it a little bit more. And now I am certainly very curious about not just near-death experiences, but any kind of paranormal phenomenon, because it's a question about being human. Is there more to us than just bricks and mortar, flesh and blood? And I've come to the very comfortable conclusion that I think there is.
So when you were getting into medical school and you were focused, and my cousin Darren is a doctor here in Canada, and I've had this question with him because he knows I do this show, he loves listening. Who knows? Maybe he's even listening tonight. He lives about 400 kilometers away from me, but you never know. But he and I have talked numerous times about this, and he has such a hard time wrapping his scientific brain around this. He wants to believe so badly. And he does admit that in the ER or in the ICU or when he worked in palliative care, that he saw some strange things that he can't understand, but he's never been able to wrap his brain around of the paranormal / supernatural type experience. Did you have that troubles when you started noticing all these trends, or was it instantaneous that you said, I got to investigate this?
Oh, it was pretty instantaneous for me. I never really struggled with the whether or not the phenomena existed. I mean, I believed my patient. I mean, he told me something. He was sincere. And the way he described it, I knew that there is no way that he would have known the details of that surgery except to have seen it from the vantage point of above his body. So I believed him and did not dismiss him. And that became intensely curious for me. And I have never really struggled with the belief of does it or does it not exist. And I think just that may be my personality. I don't know. I've never really felt that I needed to have the phenomena proved to me. That has never been my focus, because I think we're talking about something here that we, with our current science, are going to have a hard time proving the presence of. And so I kind of let that go and just kind of focused on the very human experience of having these and what does it mean to the patient. So I guess I was more behavioral oriented. And so from that standpoint, even though I grew up in kind of a left brain world and was educated in a left brain way, that was never that important to me. And I think you can actually see and appreciate more if you're not so focused on trying to prove that it does or doesn't exist.
So when you started talking with your colleagues about this phenomena that you were investigating, what was the reaction that your fellow doctors and nurses were giving you?
Well, I didn't talk to them. I mean, it became, interestingly, around that first case, I didn't know what to make of it. I still thought maybe it was something that I had not learned about in medical school. I thought maybe it was a fugue state or something psychological. So I talked to the doctor in training who was above me, and I told him about it, and he said, whatever you say to our supervising physician tomorrow on rounds, I wouldn't say that. So that very, very early on, I was informed that it's not a safe topic. And actually, up until the point that I wrote my book in 2015, I talked very little to my colleagues about it. And the response to that book from my colleagues was very interesting. They either said nothing or in whispered, hushed conversations would, look around to make sure nobody was listening and tell me about some of their own experiences with patients. So it's still, it's a little troubling to me that is not considered a safe or even a sane conversation in modern medicine. But I hope, my intent for writing the book was to contribute to the conversation and hopefully kind of sway that to make it less about proving that something does or doesn't exist and make it more about good patient care and just listening to people's stories and letting them have their truth about what happened to them.
Why do you think doctors and your fellow colleagues are so hesitant to look into this when obviously if you have those experiences in what you do, Dr. Laurin, that they would have probably had those same experiences too?
Yeah, I actually talk a little bit about this in one of the chapters of my book. I think it's actually historic because even, 200 years ago, medicine was still regarded as kind of a back alley art with potions and incantations and trephining, drilling holes in your head to let evil spirits out. And I think, with the age of enlightenment and the scientific age, medicine has really struggled to distance itself from the more superstitious side of medicine. And so I think that we've perhaps maybe gone a little bit too far in a logical direction, and it's really kind of imprisoned our ability to see things a little bit differently. But there are specialties. You mentioned your brother had some experience with palliative care and perhaps even hospice, but there are specialties where you are working with patients who are really close to that fragile edge, and they will frequently talk about patients seeing, deceased loved ones and having conversations. There's a term for it in medicine, bedside conversations, and that is actually a little bit easier for medical personnel to embrace.
I remember when my wife Jolene's grandmother passed away in, I think it was 2012, I believe, 2012 or 2013. When we walked into that room, I had an experience about 9 minutes before she passed away where I saw her spirit leave her body. And I'm someone who has absolutely been God-fearing, no pun intended, about death. And it's given me very big anxiety over my years, but that calmed me. But I remember when we arrived there, we heard about the bedside conversations because she was apparently talking to loved ones on the other side who were preparing for her. Then I saw what I saw, and the funny part about it was one of her favorite songs was Flight of the Valkyrie. And within minutes of her breathing her final breath, that song on a stereo we all thought was off started playing in front of the family, kind of to send her on her way. We actually all had a little bit of a laugh about that because, like, what a way to go out. Just press play on the old CD player,
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was kind of intriguing. That's for sure. Very intriguing. But, things like that happen. Do you find that maybe, just maybe, even though the medical practitioners may have an interest in hearing these stories, that they don't actually take the time to investigate it the way they should, because you obviously believe there's something to this.
Absolutely. I actually, one of my longtime colleagues, and I've had the pleasure of working in the same hospital system my first job is still my same job, and I've been here for 15 years. And I talked to one of my colleagues when he heard that I had wrote a book and what the topic was, and he said, in 30 years of practicing medicine, I've never had anybody tell me about a near-death experience. And I just said, have you ever asked? And he said, no, I haven't. Because the more I ask, the more I hear. And I think that, nurses, if you talk to nurses, they will say, or chaplains, they will say, yeah, we hear about that stuff all the time. And so, nurses and chaplains are presumed safe space for patients. They feel comfortable divulging these experiences to nurses and chaplains. Why do they not feel comfortable talking to us? Probably because we've created that distance. And, the unfortunate things, and one of the reasons I felt compelled to just put a conversation out there from a medical standpoint is I've heard too many times doctors who are well-intended will say to patients who've had these experiences, well, you have to understand, you were very sick, and the brain can do some funny things when it's very sick. So it was probably a hallucination, and I think that's the wrong response. It really shuts patients down, and patients that I've interviewed have told me that they felt that the doctor discounted their experience and that it actually had a negative impact on them.
For the record, what kind of doctor are you?
I am a critical care specialist. So most people, when I say that, they think I work in the emergency room, but I actually work in the intensive care unit. And I think that, probably working with very sick patients probably offers a lot of opportunity for me to inquire. And so, I'm sure, maybe people who work more in primary care might not have the opportunity to ask, or even in the emergency room. I've talked to a couple of my ER colleagues, and, just the nature of the busyness of the ER, they don't always have the time to ask. But I have a little bit more time to talk to patients and kind of explore their experiences with them.
So, being a doctor is much like being an athlete. You have to have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, a little bit of an ego to deal with what you have to deal with on a daily basis. You know, a lot of doctors deal with things differently. Do you think that the reason why the majority of doctors out there block out these experiences is because maybe they're hiding their own fear, or maybe they just have a little bit too much ego and a little bit too much science inside of them to even go down that path?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've never really thought about it in that way in particular. Maybe it's because I choose to believe that, people are well-intended. And I actually, my colleagues that I've worked with and gotten to know over so many years, they don't seem to be coming from that place. It's more of they're focused on being a good body mechanic and focused on delivering the best possible care. And it may or may not be of interest to them to explore the more psychosocial, spiritual side of patients. For me, it's intensely interesting. And I wonder if I hadn't been a doctor, if I would have been a psychologist, because I just really am fascinated with the human experience. And so I think that's a big part of what has driven me to explore this with patients and their families, and maybe what keeps other doctors from doing the same. But I still think that there is room for doctors to learn that as a skill, to in the same way that they can heal a broken bone or administer a medication. If they have a patient who's had cardiac arrest and come back, I think it's totally appropriate to learn as a physician to say, did anything unusual happen when you died that you would like to talk about?
What is your definition of a near-death experience?
It's expanded, and we could go down a little rabbit hole here if you want to. Because
we got time. Let's go for it.
We got time. Because whenever I started journaling and exploring it, I had the impression that a near-death experience was associated with sudden cardiac death. Your heart stops, you come out of your body, you see your body, you go back in, you're resuscitated, and people around you say, hey, you died. And then you can match their experience with your observations. But recently I had a patient who described to me having kind of this long, slow, near-death experience of over 2 years as he was fighting terminal cancer. And that was really fascinating to me because it had some of the hallmarks of these sudden near-death experiences where he would have, visitations from beings who would say, it's not your time to die, you still have some more work to do, and, whatever individual messages are. But he also had a total loss of fear of death around some of his experiences. And interesting to me, he actually... He was a little fearful to tell me what he was experiencing because he thought I would think he was crazy, which I assured him that's just not possible. That I'm very interested in these phenomenon. And he said that he felt like his cancer actually had its own presence and was that he was entering into dialogue with his cancer, and it was more than a mental game of addressing his cancer, more than guided imagery. He felt like there were real conversations, and that he came to the belief that his cancer had actually come to him to teach him something about death and dying. And, he unfortunately has passed now, but it was an incredible exploration with him of what he had experienced over 2 years that had the exact same hallmarks of a sudden near-death experience.
Do you define an out-of-body experience the same as an NDE, or in your opinion and research, are they two totally separate phenomena?
I think there's probably a spectrum of these phenomena. I mean, and I would even include certain dreams on that spectrum of human consciousness and experiences of unusual, anomalous experiences of human consciousness. And I've kind of come to that conclusion just by interviewing patients. And we have patients who really are not near death. We, the patient I described at the very beginning of the interview, everything in his chart was indicated that there was no trouble. He never had any heart trouble. He never had any moment in that procedure where he was near death, and yet he had an experience of being separated from his body. So I think that there are, I'm not really sure what triggers it. I'm not even sure if maybe anesthesia in his case didn't trigger it. But I think that there are out-of-body experiences that patients have when they are undergoing duress or a surgical procedure or trauma. And, we, from our point of view, they probably are pretty stable and not at risk of dying.
Did you ever read the story of Dr. Eben Alexander, the Harvard neurosurgeon who always claimed to be a man of science until he had his own near-death experience?
Yeah, I've actually met him and been able to hear his story. So when you speak at conferences that around this topic, you tend to kind of run across other people who have written about it. So I am familiar with his story.
When you see people, and Harvard is anything Ivy League always seems to be a step up above it where everybody else is. Maybe that's just ego, pride, or whatever it is. But for someone of his stature to even be questioned, or someone of your stature to be questioned on this, do you think it adds a little bit more credibility that people like yourself or Dr. Alexander are coming out and saying, look, guys, there's more to this than we know. We need to start putting some money and some funding into this to see what's actually out there?
I hope so. I mean, I think that was one of my intents in going public, is I felt pretty strongly that we needed to have a different conversation around something that human beings experience. So, I think that the problem is with our current science, I think it would be very difficult to research it. I'm hoping that, continuing to hold this question in curious regard will open up new ways of exploring it, whether that's energetic or electrical, or I don't know in what way we could. But I think with our current limited Newtonian physics, it would be a little bit difficult. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't explore trying to figure it out. And I think the University of Virginia, I believe, has a Department of Perceptual Studies that actually explores some of these phenomenon. They actually explore past lives, near-death experiences, psychic phenomenon, and actually have funding to do that. So they're a little bit of a flagship, kind of leading the way in a respected institution to ask these questions.
Is there money for that kind of funding, though? Because for any type of research, you need money.
Yeah. I think that from what I know about the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, is that there was a very generous private grant from a well-known businessman, and I'm not being secretive, I just can't remember who it is, but it was someone who was a CEO of a large company like Xerox or Kodak or some company that left them well endowed. So I think to fund this kind of research, you really need people with deep pockets who were passionate about the topic. And that is what allowed the Department of Perceptual Studies to be set up, is someone who had a deep passion about the topic. So, with our traditional grant organization, I think that would be very difficult to fund things like that at this point in time. But hopefully with more people coming forward and normalizing the experience, will open the door for more scientific exploration. I hope so.
A few times already in this first 30 minutes of the show, you have mentioned the term current science, and that because of current science, we can't see beyond what could be there. Define what you mean by current science.
Well, current science is very evidence-based. It's very material-based. What we see is what is real. What we don't see is not necessarily real. And if it's something that is we can't see, such as a dream or consciousness, it's still based and connected to something that we can touch and describe. I think that one of the examples I use in my book is actually 5,000 years ago, when beer was discovered. They thought it was something that was created by spirits and angels, and what we know now right?
Of course it was, yes.
The elixir of the gods, yeah. But, what we know now is, they would describe, after several days that it would bubble and foam, and they thought that was kind of a spiritual interaction. But what we know now is that, they would prepare the stock for it and set it outside, and yeast spores that were in the air, circulating in the air, would settle on the surface and start to ferment the sugars and produce an alcoholic beverage. We know that now. But at the time, they didn't know that, and so they assigned those properties of beer making to spiritual intervention. And I like that example because it really kind of holds some nice space for the potential that we will be able to understand and explain these phenomena in a very logical way, and that maybe consciousness naturally kind of holds itself at a safe distance whenever it's under threat, or the body is trying to die. And it may be something that we in the future might be able to explain in a way that's very satisfying and reproducible. So I guess that's what I mean with our current science. It's still limited to evidence-based, being able to reproduce results with Newtonian physics and things that we can touch and feel and see.
What would you like to see science change to try and prove or disprove your theories to NDEs?
Yeah, I don't know that I have any particular theories. It's more just musings and curiosities. But I would like to see more creativity in trying to set up maybe some reproducible environments. And I think that's been attempted, where in places where you think that people might be inclined to have a near-death experience, they will put certain things high up on a shelf and ask people, if they saw them. But the problem is that, near-death experiences are still so unpredictable. You can't predict who's going to have one and who's not. You can't even predict the circumstances because only a small percent of people who have cardiac arrests or respiratory arrests or die or trauma, you can't predict who's going to have them, and only a small percentage of people actually report them. The national figure in people who actually research this is 2 to 5% of people who have cardiac arrest have a near-death experience. That's pretty low. So I think it's our ability to kind of set up an experiment to explore it is pretty limited by just not being able to know where it's going to happen next.
So, in your opinion, where would you like to see science look into this? What are they missing out on?
Well, I think, I think the opportunity here at this point in time is just to interview and take notice of common threads. I'm not sure we have a magic box or a tool that we can hook up to patients and understand what happened to them. I think right now we are. I think it would be a step in the right direction just to open the dialogue, and that's how good research is done anyway. It's just asking questions and noticing trends, and out of that, experiments can be born. But if we're not talking about it, we're never going to notice. I think opening the dialogue and being able to have those conversations and record what we find and what we notice, then we start to notice patterns, and out of those patterns, good experiments can probably emerge of things that it would dawn on us that we could test.
I would love to see science change and take this research a little bit more seriously. But the one thing that I like about what you're doing compared to what the paranormal field is doing is you have that title of doctor that goes in front of you that automatically gives you more credibility on the subject comparatively to those who are studying the paranormal, who may be doing it out of a hobby and learning as they go rather than having a fully formed educational doctorate behind their name or in front of their name regarding that. Do you think then that the entire field of paranormal science that you have woken up to deserves more credit from the mainstream, not only doctors, but researchers and scientists in general?
Oh, sure. And for the very same reason that I just said, is that, one thing that even paranormal hobbyists are doing is inquiring and noticing and documenting. And that is at the heart of good science. And so even though the paranormal field may not be as robust with titles, I don't think it really matters, because continuing to inquire and continuing to try to record, I think that's something that people in the paranormal field are actually doing pretty well. They're just asking the question.
Mm-hmm. I hope to see it happen, because I think there's some brilliant people in this field.
Oh, yeah.
There really is. Whether they have a title or not, there are some brilliant researchers in this field getting such quality information, but they're yearning, and I'm not sure if you're like that or you fall into that category, but they're yearning for mainstream acceptance to their research. Do you worry about that? Does it concern you? Or are you more like the idea, well, if you want to buy it and look into this yourself and check the facts, there it is, but I'm tired of explaining or trying to convince people?
Interesting. I've never really felt that way. I hold it pretty lightly. I don't, and if, those who read my book will understand that my emphasis is really on the patient's experience. I am not, I'm less interested in trying to prove it. I'm more interested in listening to dialogue and honoring people's truth about what they experienced. So I have some tension around that of, it really gets me whenever doctors dismiss patients' experiences, shut them down, and say it didn't happen. Because I think that the part here that really should be about patient care is just saying, that's interesting. I can't explain it, but tell me what it meant to you and how. I think there's an opportunity to understand how they're transformed by it. But I don't know. I guess I don't really have a beef with my colleagues or even the field of science about proving it, because I'm just so intensely curious myself, and I keep asking the question because I care about the information. So I hope that people who are in the paranormal field will just keep doing what they do so well, and I think at some point society will have to buckle under the burden of proof that they continue to bring forward. That's my vision. That's my hope.
So getting back to your patients that you have had these conversations with, how many patients have described the near-death or out-of-body experience to you?
Over about 20 years, I've probably collected, a good 40 or 50 cases, and they're not all very detailed. Some of them are very vague, and I still count it. I've actually made a habit with my patients who have experienced clinical death or severe trauma. When they recover, I just ask, did anything unusual happen when you died? Or did you experience anything that you'd like to talk about? And that's opened the door to a lot of things. And some of them, the majority of them, are just very simple, where they will say, I saw a hazy figure. I felt very peaceful. I felt like the figure was saying to me it wasn't my time to die, or I felt like it was going to be okay. I've had patients explain just being, pulled up into a sparkling mist and comforted, and then suddenly they're back in their body. So it's a whole range of things. But, whenever one of the critiques about my book was, how do you have so many cases to write about? And, my answer is always the same. I ask patients, and I think it's probably more common than we realize. But when you think of the hundreds of patients that I've treated over the years, and I only have maybe 40 to 50 cases, that really is actually below the reported average of 2 to 5%. So they're just kind of condensed into my one book, and I have a blog where I've blogged about a few more. But it's really the very detailed cases are actually pretty rare. Many of them are short and vague. But I think that those are still important because no matter how detailed it is, the unifying experience that patients come away with is loss of fear of death, a sense of peace, a sense of intense love and acceptance, and even negative experiences. There's still something that informs those patients in a positive way.
Don't you love the look of shock on the patient's face when you hit them up with that question? And I'll tell you what reminds me of that, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
I have a daytime career. I moonlight doing this. But my daytime career, I work with a lot of First Nations, Native American people. And in a much different way, and I know people are like, well, how the hell are you tying this together, Dave? But this is the way it is. What I do is I have no problem going up to a First Nations person and saying, so, can you tell me about Sasquatch? And their faces, the reaction on their faces, that here's this white guy sitting in an office on the other side of a desk asking about Sasquatch of all things. It's amazing the answers I get. Do you get that look of absolute shock, too, when you just bluntly come out with that question? So did you see anything strange?
Sometimes, but, I try to phrase it so it doesn't sound like a strange question because I want it to be invitational. And, I've tried different approaches, and the best question, and it's a question I still use that doesn't seem strange to people is, did anything unusual happen when you died? And if nothing did, it doesn't register as a weird question or an intrusion. But if something did, they're usually pretty ready to talk about it, and frequently are very emotional, and struggle to describe what they experienced. I've heard so many times that patients will say, I just don't have the vocabulary to tell you what I experienced and how vivid it was and the colors and the intense feelings. It really highlights how limited we are as humans to describe, some of the realms that are beyond this human experience.
So for you personally then, how do you keep your own emotional state in check when you're hearing these stories? But because if this is such an emotional story for a lot of the patients you have had, I know I would be crying right there with them. And I'm sure you've shed a tear or two.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's what they're sharing with you is very personal, and it's a very human moment for us to be sitting there talking about something transformative like that. And of course, I can get kind of emotional with it. What's more interesting to me is seeing some of the residents I work with and the doctors in training and seeing their response to these conversations. That's more of where I see the shock, actually.
Well, please explain that. That sounds very interesting.
It is. And I'm at a point in my career where I don't feel a need to be secretive about this anymore. And I think there was a time whenever I was still establishing myself where I felt like it was a side of myself that I couldn't be too public about. But we are a regional hospital that has a university-based family practice program associated with it. And once a month, I have one resident who rotates with me in the intensive care unit and spends some time learning about ventilators and how to take care of very sick patients. And so whenever I ask that question, and I don't, I'm very much about teaching them how to take care of very sick patients. So we don't spend a lot of time talking about why it's important to ask the questions. They just see me do it. And it does open up a lot of dialogue. And I had an experience recently with a family member of a patient who was very ill and probably wasn't going to die, but we were not in that, I probably was going to die, but we were not at that point yet. We were still, trying to save this person. And the wife said to me at the bedside, I think he's not going to make it. And I said, what makes you say that? And she said, well, he was early before he became so sick, when he was just came to the hospital, he was talking to his mother who had passed away about 15 years ago. And she said, and I swear to you, he was not delusional. He was very lucid. He was having a normal conversation with me and also with his deceased mother. And I said, I believe you. Tell me more. And so she talked about this experience of the conversation and how he was just surprised that his wife couldn't see his mother, and he was fascinated with it. And so unfortunately we didn't get to talk to him, but his wife was a wonderful reporter, and and so I just asked her, I said, well, what did that mean to you to have that experience with your husband? And she said it was incredibly comforting to know that he's going to be okay, and that if he doesn't survive, he's going to be fine. And so when we stepped out of the room, the resident said to me, she said, that was really weird. And she is not in that place yet where she's probably had a lot of experiences in talking to patients, but it opened up some dialogue where I was able to say, our belief in this matters so little. It's, we're honoring their experience and their belief, and that, my friend, is good patient care. And that's what the approach I take with them. But every month, whenever I have residents rotate through, that's typically their response. They're like, this is really odd. This is really strange. But it's an opportunity to kind of broaden their perspective a little bit. And I consider that a valuable part of their education.
We only got about 4.5 minutes before we got to go to break. I'm curious, because, and I don't fully understand the healthcare system down there, me being up here in Canada.
Sure.
Because everything is government funded here. But considering healthcare down there is, I believe, all private, have you ever been forewarned about having this conversation with patients? Because this is a topic that is uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Never. I've never had any kickback from exploring this with patients. And in other systems, that may be the case, but we're a regional hospital. We're not, we're only loosely associated with an academic center, so I feel like maybe that gives me a little bit more freedom. But I've never had any ill outcomes. I've never been disciplined for having these conversations with patients. But I think the big part of that too is that I also strive to be a really competent physician, and I think if that's your focus of taking really good care of patients, then having this conversation with them is just an expansion of that, and I don't think that anybody would be able to take issue with that.
So getting back to the residents for a moment, then, have you converted any of them to full-on believers?
I don't know, because I'm only with them for a month, and then they go on, and many of them go to different parts of the state or the upper Midwest to practice. But it really, some of them are more open than others. Some of them are certainly more left brain than others, and firmly entrenched in that. And I kind of base my conversations with them on how they respond to it. I don't really have an agenda to make them believers, but I do have an agenda to make sure that they're respectful to people who have these experiences and that they don't shut them down.
You mentioned the importance of teaching these young residents about this type of phenomena, and once again, you have a new resident every month, so there's 12 a year, basically, you are teaching about this. Have any of them ever just sat down and say, why do you do this? No, not really. And I've been teaching them for 15 years, and I've never. I think when you are in a training mode, you are open to a broad range of experience, and you don't always, question in a negative way what you're experiencing. You are really in a mode of learning and holding what you learn in curious regard. So I think that's just part of the training brain. But I've never had a bad experience. I've had, where they may laugh a little bit uncomfortably, but I think it's because I normalize the conversation, or I like to think that. We got about a minute and a half. I'm wondering, though, does religion play a part in this conversation?
I try to steer clear of that because people have so many different beliefs, and my observation is that these experiences are not predicated on a belief system. I've had atheists have them. I've had people who, from a Buddhist background have them. We have a large Hmong population here in the Upper Midwest, and their experiences are very similar to people from different cultures. And I think that that's maybe something we can explore a little bit in the next hour because it is very interesting. I think that our cultural lens and our religious lens kind of dictates how we interpret these experiences.
Right.
Some will call them Jesus, some will call them ancestors, but when you have them describe exactly what they're seeing, it's very similar.
That is very interesting indeed. Dr. Laurin Bellg, you hold on for a minute because we're going to set up the first break. Man, that was a fast hour on Spaced Out Radio. It's, you know what, sometimes this show, Doc, absolutely flies on by, and I'm looking at my clock saying, really? We're at break time already? So you hold on. I'm going to take us out to break because I do want to remind all of our Spaced Out Radio listeners, if you go to spacedoutradio.com right now, you click on our shop. The little tab at the top, all the way to the right, it says shop. We have our swag going on there. You can get t-shirts, stickers, posters that are autographed. And September 29th to October 1st, the first annual Caribou Paracon. Tickets are on sale until July 31st. You get 10% off your purchase, so make sure you get them today. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I'm your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back right after this. Coming September 29th to October 1st, the first annual Spaced Out Radio Caribou Paracon. Hi, this is Dave Scott. The event will be held at the Spruce Hill Spa and Resort in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Come join us for an amazing weekend of speakers talking all things paranormal, UFOs, ghosts, aliens, Sasquatch, intuitiveness. Listen to great speakers like Miriam Delicato, Samantha Mowat, and the crypto guru, Ronald Murphy. Get your VIP passes by going to spacedoutradio.com and clicking on the Paracon banner. Come to BC, where the paranormal is waiting for you.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, they're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spacedoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Hey, this is Canadian paranormal investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET Experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest. From Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness, you can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up. Enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio Live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, it's the first Friday of the month, which means it's time for the ET Connection with our Keith Andrews. Keith comes in the first Friday of the month to talk everything alien and off-world. It's an interesting show every single time. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. I want to give a quick shout out here. One of our listeners, Aussie Rob, he listens every night from Australia, him and his wife Amber. And their little guys, they have two kids, and their little guys are like, hey, there's Dave on the radio. So, Rob, please tell your young boys that I say hello. I very much appreciate them getting excited when they hear my voice on the radio. So thanks, guys, and hopefully one day I get to meet you. That's what I want. That's what I'm going to put out to the universe, get to meet you. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are also live on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are also live on KTLK, The Fringe FM, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Quixotic. Quixotic is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes. We're also on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, Player.fm, and Stitcher. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including going to the Spaced Out Radio store, pick up a shirt, a sticker, a poster that I will autograph, and you can get your tickets right now, as of today, 10% off until July 31st for the first annual Caribou Paracon, which will be happening at 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia, at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. It's a great location. So make sure you check that out for September 29th to October 1st. You can also check out the encounter online and join the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. Tonight we are talking with Dr. Laurin Bellg, and she wrote an incredible book called Near Death in the ICU. It's one of the top sellers on Amazon. She's an award winner and a physician as well. Lives a busy life. Dr. Laurin, welcome back.
Thanks.
Right before the break, we were talking about the whole religious belief in what the NDE/OBE is, and you wanted to get into some detail with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's our nature to try to take anomalies that we can't quite describe and put it into a scaffolding that's familiar and comfortable for us. I think it really kind of helps us try to make sense of that experience. And I think you would ask me, how religion or spiritual practice plays into the near-death experience or these anomalies. And my observation is that what we experience, we tend to interpret through our belief system. But my curiosity has become what is common in these experiences. And I've observed that when you remove the lens of the belief system, is what they're describing is very similar. Whether you're an atheist, a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, it's very similar. And some patients will interpret what they see as angels or Christ. Some people will interpret it as ancestors. Some will interpret it as the Buddha. And when you say, well, what did you see? That they will say a big being that was kind of humanoid and hard to describe. But, they actually put their own imprint on it. So I think that what they're experiencing probably is from the same plane of existence, the same realm, seems to be pretty benevolent. And, we're just kind of describing it in a way that we can try to make sense of something that is otherwise potentially nonsensical.
Do you mind if I start to bring in some questions from our audience? Because they're really starting to pile up here. This one comes from BTO. Have you ever witnessed any of your patients experience religious, ET, or interdimensional experiences, or any other type of differing NDE?
I've witnessed a lot of different things through the eyes of my patients. I personally have not seen that, but just hearing them describe things. One of the most unusual experiences in that realm, and it sounds like your listener might be interested in more of the alien ET kind of direction. I did not include this into my book because it really didn't fit, and it kind of defies our traditional understanding of near-death experiences, but the person who experienced cardiac death actually experienced when she died, instead of seeing a religious being or an angel or something like that, she actually was taken to a craft. And she described that craft as being silver and kind of luminous, and she said it was more real than this realm, and that really had an impact on her, and she felt like it was an alien encounter. And that's the only time I've ever heard anything like that, but it was really fascinating, and she wasn't afraid. She actually had the experience of it feeling very familiar to her, and she came away from that experience saying, I think I might maybe not be from here. Maybe I'm more connected to, the beings on the craft that I experienced, and that was really fascinating. And I think you hear stories like that if you can just hold the interview kind of loosely and let them, express what they experienced. It can be very interesting.
Trip is asking, what are your thoughts on anesthesia awareness being part of the near-death experience during surgeries?
I think it's different. Anesthesia awareness is, we have the perception that they are unconscious, but they can come back and tell us things. And I think that you have to always be aware that the medications that we are giving patients can certainly impact their experience. And certainly medications can cause people to hallucinate. But what's different with anesthesia awareness, usually it's more auditory, and they're hearing conversations, they're experiencing sensations. But what is really what sets an out-of-body experience during surgery apart, or a near-death experience, is that they actually have a perspective of being up above their body, and they can describe in pretty vivid detail what they see. And that really doesn't fit an anesthesia awareness model, but it's important to keep in mind if you do want to research these, to be critical of what you're hearing, not in a negative way, but in more of a just trying to understand it, and always looking for an explanation that might explain what they experienced. That's a good question, actually.
A follow-up to that question comes from #SpacedOutRadio on Twitter from Deb, and she's saying a lot of primary care doctors believe it's anesthesia, and if brought back, it's like dreaming. If there is no anesthesia, they refer to it as psyche. What is your opinion of that?
Well, that's actually something I talk about in my book, is that, we have our own belief systems in medicine that we try to impose on patients. And what I champion is actually being able to set our own belief system in medicine aside and just talk about the experience and what it meant to them without trying to interpret it and trying to explain it away. And I've actually heard from patients that have had a couple of near-death experiences explain that, or have the experience that they felt some personal trauma from having their experience dismissed by their caregivers, and felt disrespected at having it explained away like that. And I think it's valid to say, look, I don't know what happened to you, but it's awfully interesting, and tell me about it, and tell me what it meant to you. And that is a much more valuable conversation than saying, probably what you experienced was a hallucination, or probably what you experienced was part of your psyche. And that may be true. I think that there are a lot more things along the spectrum of consciousness that happen that we can't fit neatly into our explanations.
Mm-hmm. Catherine is asking, how many times are an NDE confused with the loss of consciousness under a very bright lamp?
Yeah, it might be... it might happen that what they're experiencing can easily be explained by their surrounding environment. Again, the experiences that really catch my attention, because sometimes we do hear things that we can easily explain. I hear that perhaps more than I hear about things that I can't explain, where patients will say, whenever I was, when I was out and you had me sedated, I experienced this, and we can say, yeah, that actually correlates with a very bright lamp that's above you. But sometimes it doesn't always fit the environment and what we're able to attach their experience to.
Tripp is asking, have you, Dr. Bellg, ever had any sights of apparitions of a patient that has passed at the hospital or at any home?
I have, actually. It's, I think that hospitals in particular are ripe with opportunity to experience things like that. I have had the experience, as have a couple of other people in the hospital, of seeing a very thin man who is obviously in ill health, walking with an IV pole, and it's just a flash. I've actually seen it a couple of times, and what's interesting about that particular experience is that there is a room that's no longer in use as a patient room in that corner where he's seen, and there is a cord in a bathroom in the hospital where if you are in trouble, you can pull the cord and a light goes off and people come and help you. In our hospital, when that cord goes off, it's also linked to, when that light goes off, it's also linked to a paging system, so nurses will automatically get paged. And my first awareness of that was when I was talking to one of our ICU managers and her pager went off, and she looked at the room. She said, "Oh, that's the ghost." And I said, "Wait, what? That sounds intriguing. Tell me about it." But apparently this light will still go off in this room, and it will trigger a page to nursing staff. And now they've actually even disconnected that light electronically, and it still goes off. So that's very, very interesting.
Wow. That's kind of creepy.
In a kind of a interesting and juicy way.
Absolutely. Eric Markham, who is a medical technologist down in North Carolina, listening to this show. We call him the preacher around here. He is saying, what do people who are atheists see during a near-death experience?
Well, I mean, the most striking one that I have heard within the past few years is he described this very luminous being that he said filled the entire corner of the room. And he said it was very humanoid, and he felt that it communicated with him with thought that he was safe, that if he died, he would be okay. And the interesting thing about that is that he was a staunch atheist, so he didn't try to cram it into a religious interpretation. And it seemed that he was able to just really have that nice, pure connection with whatever he had experienced, and he was comforted by it. And he felt he was transformed by it to the point that he said, "I'm really going to have to think about my belief system because that really doesn't fit my current thought about the universe." And I thought that was kind of cool, that it was an experience that was kind of a gift to him to kind of broaden his philosophy.
Let's go over to Twitter for Canadian Joe at #SpacedOutRadio. Are there any common factors that contribute to a positive or hellish near-death experience?
I've only had 2 patients describe very negative experiences, and my curiosity about that is they had a troubled life. One of the patients had been abused pretty severely. And, I'm wondering if, some of the residue from our human experience we drag with us into these non-human experiences. But even those 2 patients, even though they were negative experiences, they still had a positive impact on their lives. Because the one who had been abused, it was really kind of traumatic for her to have that near-death experience, but what she described is after she moved through that, she did have the sense in her experience that there was something brighter up ahead that she was moving toward that was safe and that exuded a more positive presence. And that's what she focused on. And she's the one who offered to me. She said, I think that I had that experience because of everything everything that's happened to me. And I was really kind of intrigued by her interpretation of it. But the positive experiences in my experience of interviewing patients far outweigh the negative ones.
Let's go over to the SOR Space Travelers Club for Vivian. She is asking, we've all heard that medical professionals blame the sights and sensations felt by patients during a near-death experience on the brain dying and not for paranormal reasons. If this were true, why does only a small amount of patients go through this? If it were the brain dying, wouldn't all patients be going through what the medical professionals blame it on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good observation, and I think it's something that the medical profession needs to take into consideration. But I think that the things that patients experience in the vivid way that they experience in them, especially when they're describing beings and nature, and those are things that a dying brain is just not capable of generating. So I think that the dying brain certainly can release electrical impulses and lights and similar phenomenon, but the level of detail and being able to be outside of have the vantage point outside of your body and describe what you're seeing, that, from what I know about the brain, it is just not capable of doing that. So I think that's a safe excuse for physicians that it's very limited. And if they stop to think about what they're saying and what patients are describing, they would realize how limited that is.
Let's get back to Twitter for Deb at #SpacedOutRadio. Why don't a lot of doctors deal with death? Why do they have hospice? Are they not comfortable with the death process?
That's not my observation. I actually think we're very comfortable with the death process. I think that the emergence of hospice as a philosophy and as a practice is more out of realizing that process needs to be respected and have dedicated professionals. We actually bring hospice right into the ICU because we feel like it's so important. And I think, every doctor has their own personality and their own issues with death, but I think as a profession, we're pretty comfortable talking about it to the point that we felt like it needed its own specialty.
Let's get to Catherine's question here, if you don't mind. When people return from making the choice to return, how many of the people you have dealt with cry for the longing of love they felt that they left behind?
That's the majority of them, actually. Most people that I've interviewed have a sense of longing for what they experienced, and many of them are kind of miffed that they have to come back. But it's very common for them to be comforted by the fact that they were instructed that they still have work to do, and that seems to be a common theme. It's like, you're not done. There's still stuff that you need to experience. I've had patients say, actually a recent one just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was actually in tears saying, I did not want to come back, but I was told that my wife still needed me, that she actually was a little bit foretelling something that hasn't happened to her yet, but he was told that she's going to experience something, an illness where she will need him, and that's why he came back. So even though he said, I really didn't want to, and he's telling me this through tears, telling me how beautiful it was and describing, vivid colors and a pastoral scene, and actually meeting a couple of deceased loved ones that he was really close with. He said that actually in that moment felt more real to him than this realm, and it was very difficult to come back, but he was comforted by the fact that he would be able to serve a purpose for his wife in the future.
That's almost romantic.
It is. I thought it was lovely.
Is this a romantic experience? And I'm not saying in a sexual type of way.
Well, I think it's based on love, and that tends to be a common theme, too, for people who come back from these experiences, is that the most common word that's used to describe it is intense love. And, people will say peace frequently as well, but love seems to be a common theme. And it's interesting to me that they would choose to universally describe that as something that they experienced. And they have a hard time putting it into words what they mean, but the closest that they can come to describing the emotion of what they experienced was love.
I have to throw in a funny bit here because on Twitter, Canadian Joe put a meme up at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. He says, Chuck Norris had a near-death experience once. Death is still trying to recover. I think that's hilarious.
That's awesome. That's terrific.
That is really good. I would love it if you took some time here to explain what people go through from your research when they have a near-death experience. And let's say it's someone who comes in with a traumatic injury, maybe from a car accident or something.
In terms of the transition from the physical to more.
Yes, like if you put all the stories together that you have heard over your career, are there any patterns that you have kind of pieced together a story as to what happens?
Well, I wonder. My curiosity is if our consciousness is able to kind of extract itself from a traumatic experience or a painful experience and observe it from a less impassioned place, something a little bit more detached, because that seems to be a common theme, even if people are not necessarily near death, but if they are in a trauma. Because I work in two different hospitals, two different ICUs. They belong to the same system, but one of our hospitals is a trauma hospital, and I would say that in that population, out-of-body experiences are more common. And I wonder if maybe that trauma to the physical body it kind of loosens the shell a little bit and makes it more easy to kind of separate consciousness from the body. But I think that the common experience of most people will say they don't really remember the traumatic incident, but they will remember at some point being aware of what was going on, but outside from a more detached perspective. And whether they, if they hear it, if it's auditory, that catches people's attention less, both ours and the patient's, because that's easily explained away. And something mystical might have happened, but it's harder to kind of let that stand out as a pretty anomalous experience. But if it's visual and we are able to know that they were not conscious and confirm that in our documentation, which is something we do, that actually catches our attention and stands out more. Not sure if I answered her question, but that's kind of where it led.
Are these experiences segregated to a selection of the population? Does it happen to people who are older, maybe children, or people in their prime? Who experiences this more? Men, women?
Yeah, I've actually had patients report experiences across the broad spectrum. A standout for me, one of my favorite stories to share is about a guy in his late 20s, and maybe he was 27, 28, and he was parasailing and fell out of his glider and hit the water pretty soundly, and actually was drowning. He had no pulse. He had received CPR, and he actually had a very interesting experience of it took him a while to realize that what he was seeing down below him was him. And he actually thought he was still in his glider floating up, but at some point he realized, wait a minute, that guy's me, and they're doing CPR on me. But he still had this perception of being up in his glider. But the really cool thing about this experience is that as soon as he was conscious and we took him off the breathing machine and he was able to communicate, he he was telling everybody about what had happened to him. He was incredibly transformed by this experience, and moving forward, it didn't have follow-up with him afterwards, but while he was in the hospital, this was really a turning point for him to kind of see things and see life in a different way. And, he was 27, 28.
Do you see, though, a lot more experiences happening with women compared to men?
Not really. No. I mean, I think it's pretty uniform, pretty equally distributed. If I look back at the cases that I've journaled about, it's pretty equal.
Is it harder or more believable if it comes out of a child's mouth?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't interact with children. I'm an adult physician, so I don't have that experience. But I don't know. I actually would think that it's more astounding if you hear it from someone who has grown into a pretty firm belief system that's been informed by their culture and their religion, for them to have an experience and just see that their world just got turned upside down. That seems more astonishing. I think children more readily believe in mystery. They haven't been tainted by our interpretation of reality. So I can't really answer that question. I can only wonder, just based on interacting with my own children. But I think even people who have these experiences are more enthralled when they're a little bit older, because they've become firmly entrenched in a certain way of interpreting reality. And when something turns their reality on their head, it really catches their attention, and that's kind of fun to see.
Let's go to Twitter for a couple of questions. This one comes from Muji Boy. How about people who dream about dying but never have a life-threatening experience? Are the dreams different from an NDE?
Well, I think I talked about this in our first hour, that I've really come to the belief that there's this spectrum of conscious phenomenon, and that can encompass out-of-body experiences, psychic experiences, dreams. And I think that it is probably all part of plugging in to a different place that holds a part of our existence. And again, that's my own interpretation. There's nothing sound that I can base that on, but it makes sense to me that a lot of the unifying factor of a lot of these paranormal experiences, even ghostly experiences, is that it's kind of a spectrum of existence and a spectrum of conscious experience. And that might even be the case for people who have had some alien encounters. I don't know. But it's certainly, it's kind of unifying for me anyway to think about it in that way.
Let's get to Eric's question at #SpacedOutRadio. What do you believe then, Dr. Bellg, is the difference in having a lucid dream to a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about lucid dreaming, so I really can't say. But from what I understand, the little I know is that you can actually interact with your dream, and it may in that way have something in common with the near-death experience, where the near-death experience often for patients is very interactive. And they're communicating with loved ones who have crossed over. They're communicating with angelic beings. And I think, again, I'm not an expert and I don't know a lot about lucid dreaming, but from what I do know, it is very interactive. And you are very aware of yourself in the dream and actually to some extent can control that interaction. So I think there may be some common threads between those two experiences.
Let's get to another question. This goes back to people who experience. It comes from Catherine. She is asking, who is more likely to accept what they saw in a near-death experience, women or men?
Yeah, I really, I think that it's going to be hard to kind of polarize these experiences along gender lines with the patient population that I've interviewed. because I've had some women who were pretty determined that what they experienced didn't happen, and the same thing with men. Actually, one of the most interesting stories along those lines is a patient that we had in the intensive care unit who never really had a near-death experience. I think her experience was more kind of an out-of-body experience, but she was very, very sick. I mean, she had septic shock. She certainly was at risk for dying, but we never thought at any point that she would die. We thought that she would be sick for a long time. She had some organ damage from it, but we always felt like she would recover. And whenever she was conscious and we had taken the ventilator out, she was angry. She was really upset because she described an experience of being wide awake, even though she was documented as being unconscious, and talking to the nurse, and the nurse ignoring her, and that she tried on several occasions to get the nurse's attention, and the nurse just ignored her. And even when she was doing her assessment and her exam, she said that she was talking to her, and the nurse refused to interact with her. But on based on the nurse that she described, she was totally unconscious and sedated during that day. So there's no way she could have had an interactive experience of conversation. And she had a tube in her throat. She was connected to the ventilator, so she wouldn't have been able to talk anyway. But she describes trying to tell the nurse that she had to go to the bathroom, but she had a tube in her bladder, so she was free to go to the bathroom. But she said that she got frustrated with the nurse, got out of bed, and walked out of her room looking for a bathroom and couldn't find one, so she got so frustrated she decided she was just going to get back in bed and pee in the bed, and the nurse could clean it up. Well, we didn't see that any of that had ever happened. And so whenever I tried to talk to her about maybe she had an out-of-body experience, and that, just tried to normalize it, and that, sometimes we hear about things like that. What you didn't experience was not weird, but maybe, our records don't show that you were awake during that time that you described. And she was pretty adamant. She stuck to her story, and she didn't believe it at all, even though, we tried to explain to her that we never saw her get up. And there are cameras on her. I mean, patients are being monitored, and none of the footage showed that she had ever gotten out of bed.
That is way too strange. Christopher. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, that just goes to show how firm and entrenched our belief systems can be, both for doctors and patients, is that when we experience something strange, our the protective part of our psyche can be so entrenched, and that scaffolding so firm that we can't even entertain the possibility that it could have been something anomalous.
Let's get to another question here. This is from Chris. And Christoph is asking, can people with traumatic medical conditions or birth-related conditions be more prone to these type of lucid experiences?
That doesn't seem to be a common thread that I've noticed, because some people who, I have a healthy collection of patients who have had, especially with cardiac death, have had no prior traumatic experience, and they have an out-of-body or near-death experience. So in the patients that I've worked with, I've not made that observation that tends to be a prediction of people more easily having anomalous experiences.
I have a couple audience members who have had experiences, and Dawn has a question for you. She says, my near-death experience was all black and nothing, but full of love that I had never felt before, like it was nothing and everything at the same time. Have you, Dr. Bellg, ever heard of anything like this before?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, whenever I had, in the first hour, when I said that I had maybe 40 to 50 patient experiences documented, and that many of them were brief and void of a lot of characteristics, that's exactly what I was talking about. I mean, some people will describe just this intense feeling of acceptance, love, unity. I've heard that used before is that they couldn't see anything, but they just felt this intense sense of connection and that they were one with everything. I mean, even patients who didn't really have a strong belief system in that particular language would come back and explain that. And I've had, patients say it was dark. I've also had patients say it was just white. I just saw, I was just aware of intense brightness and have that same feeling.
And you've never had your own experience?
In retrospect, whenever I was writing the book, it's one thing that I include in the foreword. I had a very unusual experience whenever I was younger and really sick. I was hospitalized, and I hadn't really paid much attention to it and had kind of forgotten about it until I sat down to write my book. But I had, I lost a really good friend to a car accident whenever I was when we were in our early 20s, and not long after that, I was hospitalized with an illness and in the hospital for several days. And I saw a young girl in the room and was told soundly by people around me that there was nobody there. But I saw her on several occasions, and she looked like she was about 10 years old and was dressed in kind of 1950s type clothes, had on a gingham dress, a check dress, and had on a cardigan, had a barrette in the side of her hair. I could see it very distinctly. She never interacted with me. But what was interesting to me is that my friend who was killed in a car accident had been in a production where she was, a stage production where she played Little Orphan Annie, and had clothes like that. And I kind of put that together after the fact. I think that's a good case of something I experienced. I didn't have the belief system in place to even just really categorize what had happened to me, and just kind of brushed it off as I was really sick. And in retrospect, now much older, writing the book, I revisit that experience as I'm collating other people's, and I saw it in a different way. And I remember what it felt like for people to tell me that it wasn't real, that felt awful. And I remember being incredibly curious and just trying to figure it out. And it was so incredibly real. And I actually saw her again once I left the hospital room. And once I left the hospital, one other time. So in retrospect, I realized how meaningful that was to me. But at the time that it happened, it wasn't. It was just confusing. I didn't attach a lot of meaning to it.
Was there a story out there that and I would love for you to share one with our audience here, that absolutely just maybe transformed you on who you are, or gave you a new perspective of everything that's ahead of us?
I think my transformation has been slow and is still emerging. It's been cumulative. But, one of my favorite stories, and this is a story that really drove me to say, I need to write something that hopefully my colleagues will read, and also families, because it's not just colleagues. Sometimes families can shut patients down, too. But I had a patient who came in with a cardiac arrest and had multiple rounds of CPR. We didn't expect it, and a long resuscitation process of over an hour. And we were concerned that she wasn't going. If she did survive, she'd probably have some brain damage from lack of oxygen. But 10 years earlier, she had a traumatic experience where she was in an accident and had a head injury. And while her personality was preserved, she actually had an ability, of kind of a psychic ability after her accident that she didn't have before, where she was able to foretell things and kind of had the experience of being able to tell what people were thinking, and her family kind of shut her down. She was from a very conservative Christian belief system, and that they were very uncomfortable with what was happening, and so she sequestered it. The phenomena didn't stop. She still, for the next decade, had psychic experiences and was able to predict things that would happen. And then she had her cardiac arrest, and she had this amazing near-death experience, and had seen some loved ones that had passed over, had that experience of intense love. And whenever I asked her, did anything unusual happen, she just broke down in tears and told me the experience. But she needed me to ask her because she was so afraid to tell her family, and she felt lonely that she had had this transformative experience, had lost all of her fear of death, and couldn't tell the people closest to her because they were not capable of hearing it, and not capable of hearing something that was important to her without judging it. And that is still a pivotal experience to me for a lot of reasons. I was fascinated by the fact that she had intuitive abilities after a traumatic brain injury, and I was also fascinated that she had an amazing experience and was ready to bring back the news, but she didn't feel like she could tell it. So that one patient experience transformed me on a lot of different levels and had me thinking deep thoughts for a very long time.
Let's get to another question from Catherine here. And she is asking, how many people come back differed from before their experience? Likewise, how many people are prone to dismiss it?
I think that the majority of people, and I have a very limited patient population. I mean, I work in 2 hospitals, so this is a small demographic. But the patients that I've encountered over the past 20 years, the majority of them get it, that something very unusual happened. It's not common, even though it is not unheard of, for people to dismiss it. But my suspicion is that if they dismiss it as just a crazy dream, we probably won't hear about it. And if they dismiss it, they're not likely to register it as something unusual. When I ask them, does something unusual happen when you were so sick or when you almost died? But the majority of people are not only they not only recognize that something really unusual and spectacular happened, they're transformed by it. And the common themes of losing their fear of death, feeling total peace, total love, total acceptance, and that sense of unity of being one with everything. That's a very common theme in people who've had these experiences.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago regarding the patient who all of a sudden came back with psychic abilities. Have you noticed that happen a lot with patients where all of a sudden they have maybe not psychic abilities, but there's the gentleman in the U.S. who had never played piano before, had a near-death experience, and now he can play piano fluently. There's a lot of these different stories that seem to come out where it almost like it triggers something in the brain that allows some talent to all of a sudden pass through.
Yeah, I've only had 2 patients have that kind of experience. The lady I described, and then another one that I'll tell you in a second. But I think the reason that I may not hear about that is because I typically just treat patients in the intensive care unit. And so once they leave the intensive care unit and actually are more vocal and start to experience these things, they may actually go on to experience things that I don't even have a chance to ask them about. But one of the interesting experiences was a gentleman that we had maybe 7 or 8 years ago who had multiple cardiac arrests and his heart would stop, and he had a real problem with his heart rhythm where he just couldn't maintain a normal heart rhythm. And so before he could get his implanted device to kind of keep his heart regulated, he had probably 4 or 5 cardiac arrests and full-on cardiac arrests where we were doing CPR and resuscitating him and trying to keep him on this planet. And he described after he was awakened and stable and taken off the ventilator, how he was able to hear the thoughts of the nurses around him. And he also described a conversation that his wife and daughter had out in the waiting room. And he described it in great detail. And he was unconscious at the time, according to our perception and our records, on the day that his daughter came up to visit and brought her young son, his grandson, but he was able to describe their conversation and silly things that his grandson was saying, and that waiting room is outside of the intensive care unit and probably 30 feet down a hallway. So that was really curious to me. But I actually saw him again outside of work, and he remembered me and was excited to kind of tell me some of the unfolding phenomenon that he had had. And one of the interesting things is that he had, he was older, so he had some issues with vision. He wore glasses. He had lost some of his hearing, so he had hearing aids. And for several weeks after his discharge from the hospital, he didn't need his glasses, and he said he could see with incredible clarity and actually hyper clarity, where colors were brighter than they should be, and he could see things sharper than they probably were naturally, and he didn't need his hearing aids. He could hear he could still hear conversations, particularly with between people he was really emotionally connected to, like family members. He could hear them over great distances, even if they were in a different town, which that was just really curious to me. But he said that faded over time, and actually he was kind of glad that it faded because it was a bit of an intrusion to be able to hear other people's conversations.
Let's get to a question from Ron in Saskatchewan. I'm surprised you might actually be able to see Ron. It's so flat if you look north. He'll be he'll be a guy.
I'll take a look.
He'll be some guy wearing a watermelon on his head, waving at you in Wisconsin, right? But Ron is asking, how many people wish they didn't come back?
I would say the vast majority of them. I'm not even. There's a sense of longing that they express, that they would have rather stayed there. And I think I referred to this earlier in the conversation, that most of them, though, are not bitter about coming back. They understand that they had to for a certain reason. That tends to be kind of a common theme, too. Some people are given a choice and choose to come back usually for reasons of attachment to loved ones, or that are certainly motivated by that, or a sense of needing to bring some things to closure. I had one gentleman who said he certainly waffled with coming back, but then he realized that there are some things that he needed to say to people, some things, some tasks that he needed to bring to close so that his family wouldn't struggle. And I think that was a pretty selfless act, especially if he was given a choice. But the vast majority of people say, given an opportunity, I certainly would have loved to stay there. But they also have a sense that they're going to return there. That's what is a universal theme as well, is that once people touch that space, they have a certainty that that is a space that they will return to when they die.
We only got about 2.5 minutes before we got to go to break, and I just want to follow up with a question. Ron is an NDE experiencer. He said he came back very sensitive to others and can now sense death before people die. Have you heard of that?
Interesting.
Have you ever heard of that one?
I have, yeah. I mean, it's as I've started to speak at different conferences, I've not really had a patient of mine state that, and I think it's just because I don't follow them outside of the intensive care unit, but I've certainly had experiencers speak to me at conferences where they have expressed that they have, particularly around death, have a sense of foretelling when someone's going to pass. That's kind of curious. I mean, I think about that in terms of, they have touched a space that someone that they can tell is going to die is about to touch that space, and my musing has kind of led me to wonder if, because they were kind of experiencing the same atmosphere, that may be what they're plugging into, is that person's moving closer to that realm. This is my own personal thought, but it's certainly something that I have heard about.
We got about a minute and a half, and I just want to squeeze this one in. Have you ever had a case or a patient who absolutely loved what they saw on the other side, or maybe it scared them so much that they actually transformed their life? Maybe they were very conservative, and now they turned into, freakish party animal, or maybe they were, satanic, and now they run around preaching the word of God. Have you ever had that type of extreme?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, most people are transformed by these experiences, and it's very common that if they were a negative person, for them to be more positive. I mean, it does tend to have that kind of transformation where people have a more altruistic outlook on life. People certainly can be transformed. Some of the personality changes, though, we might see more in people who have organ transplants. Usually subtle, but I do have a couple of patients that have had organ transplants and had some pretty remarkable personality changes from that.
I always wondered, if you put someone else's organ in their body, does the person who accepted the organ, do they pick up any traits of the people? Maybe you can answer.
I think we need to talk about that when we come back.
Yeah. Obviously, I was a little late in asking that one. I got greedy with the question, but that's okay. Dr. Laurin Bellg is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. Her book, Near Death in the ICU. You got to get it. LaurinBellg.com is her website. I highly suggest you check it out. Go to Amazon right now and get the book. And don't forget, tickets for the first annual Caribou Paracon now for sale at spacedoutradio.com. If you get it before July 31st, you get a 10% discount on the price. So scoop them up today, because the Paracon, September 29th, October 1st, is going to be a great time indeed. We'll be back with the final hour of Spaced Out Radio right after this. Looking for a great weekend getaway this fall? Hi there, this is Dave Scott. Come on up to the heart of British Columbia for the first annual Spaced Out Radio Caribou Paracon, being held at the Spruce Hills Spa and Resort in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Speakers from all over North America are coming to discuss Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and intuitiveness for the 3-day event, September 29th to October 1st. For more information, go to spacedoutradio.com and click on the Caribou Paracon banner and book your tickets today. Come to BC, where the paranormal is waiting for you.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Have you got your Cosmic Passport? If you need one, tune in to Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Weekend. This is Elizabeth Anglin, ET experiencer, spirit medium, and host of Cosmic Passport. Each weekend I'll be bringing you interviews and support from other paranormal experiencers, and the best in intuitive spiritual guidance from across the globe. It's all happening starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight Eastern, on spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4COP. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Wachowski's Strange Days.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you along for the ride. Tomorrow night on the program, our Keith Andrews is back the first Friday of the month. We make it the ET Connection for our monthly feature. Keith will talk everything extraterrestrial and off-world starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you with us. We are also live on the WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We're also live on KTLK, The Fringe FM, in Las Vegas on Renegade Talk Radio. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, the Double R Machine has a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Quixotic. Quixotic is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you're on social media, you could be like Andrew right now and use the hashtag SpacedOutRadio to connect with me live during the show. You can follow me at Spaced Out Radio as well. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can tune us in on TuneIn, download this show and others on iTunes. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club for $5 a month. You can also shop at our store. We have t-shirts, we have stickers, we have posters, and as of today, if you plan on coming up to our Caribou Paracon on September 29th, right through October 1st at the beautiful Spruce Hills Resort and Spa in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia, you could get a 10% discount off your purchase price of VIP tickets, actually all tickets, until July 31st. And if you're interested in reading up on the news, read up on the Encounter Online, our great news section put together by Everett Thiemer and Eric Markham. Tonight we are talking about the near-death experience. Author and Dr. Laurin Bellg has written an award-winning book. It's amazing. I highly suggest you go to Amazon and get it. It's called Near Death in the ICU. Dr. Bellg, welcome back.
Thank you.
I do want to say that we have lined up something during the break where you are going to actually do an interview with Eric Markham from the Encounter Online in the near future. That will be posted in the SOR Space Travelers Club. So if you want to hear another interview with Dr. Bellg regarding this, you have to become a member so you can get into the private side of our website in the future. So I appreciate you doing that. Right before the break, we were talking about organ transplant, and I'll even include blood transfusion on that. Have you noticed patients who have received different body parts from other people, albeit a heart, a lung, a kidney, that they have actually taken on traits of the person who donated the body organs?
Yeah, I've had one patient that was a standout for me, who had a heart transplant. Now we're not a transplant center, but certainly we take care of patients who have had transplants for other reasons. And this gentleman, what was intriguing to me is he had a heart transplant 15 years earlier, and he was stable from a transplant standpoint. He came into the hospital for an asthma flare, and it was bad enough that he ended up being on the breathing machine for a couple of days. And what his wife was telling me, and he confirmed later, is that he did not have asthma at all until he had his heart transplant, and the person who was the donor had struggled from asthma. But what was more intriguing is that he had kind of a personality transplant with that as well. He was a Midwest farmer, very reclusive, very quiet, not very interactive, kind of stuck around home, and took care of his cows. But when he had his heart transplant, he had a totally different personality. He was very outgoing. He took up an interest in watching sappy movies, the Hallmark Channel. He became kind of in fact, he would buy a TV guide and circle the movies that he wanted to watch. And his wife and daughter were kind of laughing at him that, they know he had a personality shift whenever he received that heart. But he was very interested in doing housework afterwards, and he was helping his wife do laundry and dishes, and previously he would, just kind of stick to the barn chores. And that was pretty dramatic. Medical literature does comment on that, that patients do experience some maybe subtle or soft personality changes after an organ transplant, that it's not usually that dramatic. Many of the hardcore scientists will attribute it to the side effects of the anti-rejection medications that they take to kind of blunt their own immune system that would attack their new organ. But I don't know. I don't think taking a sudden interest in house cleaning, if you were previously relegated to the barn, would be a reasonable side effect of a medication. I think that's a pretty hard sell to try to fit that into that box. That was dramatic.
I am never getting an organ transplant if that means I'm going to start vacuuming and doing the dishes.
Then you need to you need to find out more about your donor before you sign up for that.
Exactly.
But that was pretty dramatic. I mean, that usually doesn't happen. I think the changes are usually more subtle.
Eric has a question here. He is asking, does your facility have an official protocol for dealing with near-death experiences?
No. I'm the protocol. I think that, that would be amazing if that happened. I think that certainly my colleagues are a little bit more open. I've actually had nurses call me to ask if I would come talk to a patient that I wasn't involved in their care and help them, because they were talking about an experience they had, and would I be willing to come talk to them about it? I've certainly become more involved in conversations with our chaplain service. They will reach out to me if a patient talks to them about a near-death experience. They'll ask if they want to talk with a doctor about it, and some of them do. And so I'll call them at home, or if they're in the hospital, I'll go talk to them. So I kind of am the program there, but unofficial.
Let's get to another question here in regards to the whole experience. Do you feel that this kind of shift adds credence to the ancient Greek belief that the heart is the seat of the soul?
Maybe. I mean, I'd not really thought of that. But I think that there is something pretty powerful about, the heart specifically. I actually would draw your attention back to the heart transplant patient. I think some of the more dramatic personality changes, at least in the literature, tend to happen with people who've had heart transplants. And then there's the whole philosophy of, the power of heart math that certainly takes, that particular organ, elevates it a little bit to something that's certainly central. It is kind of our life force. If your heart starts beating, you die pretty quickly. So that maybe they knew something way back then.
I have an interesting question here that, honestly, I've thought about this for a long time in regards to this subject, but we have people who have NDEs, but has there been anybody who has had, say, two different NDEs that were completely different experiences? I have one case where this person had three NDEs, and all three of them were different. They still had the common thread. What was different for her is that she saw different places. She still saw loved ones. That was her experience, is that every time that she died, she actually saw a deceased relative, and it was never the same person. And her take on that is that, in that realm, in that space, is that she was actually seeing
what was associated with her loved one, whatever space that they were associated with in that realm of existence, which kind of raises the theory of thought forms. And my curiosity about that is there a certain ability to kind of create our own reality in that space?
Mm-hmm. It is different because if you're having 3 different experiences, do you think that possibly we are looking at a situation where you're being shown more of the bigger picture rather than just 3 different movies, shall we say?
I think that's probably correct. It certainly makes sense to me that when we have a near-death experience, we probably see in just such a small slice of reality in that existence, in that whatever energy system that is. I'm sure it's so much bigger and broader, and people's experience of it is so different that that's a natural conclusion to draw, is that it's we're just seeing a tiny little sliver of a bigger reality.
This is how cruel my audience can be. Eric states, if Dave gets a transplant from a vegan, the bacon economy will collapse. You know what? That would be my luck. Honestly, that would be
a sad day.
That would be my luck, that the person I get a body part from in a transplant is vegan, and all of a sudden I am eating vegan bacon and quinoa every single day.
Yeah, that would make me personally very sad too. I love my bacon. Yeah.
It's a cruel audience sometimes.
I see that. Yeah,
cruel
I'm catching
audience.
the flavor.
Yeah, and I know any time now. See, they bug me a lot about garden gnomes because I hate garden gnomes. So normally when somebody gives a shot like that, the garden gnomes are quick to follow absolutely everywhere. And I hate those things, Doc.
So with Twisted Justice, in your near-death experience, you would actually see a garden gnome.
Yeah,
instead of a deceased
exactly.
relative.
A garden gnome presenting me vegan bacon,
exactly,
along with quinoa and kale.
This is the heaven you have to look forward to.
That is the absolute nightmare. Now I know what hell is, to be honest with you.
That's funny. Yeah.
Now I know what hell is. We touched a little bit earlier in regards to the darker side of the experience, and we didn't really get into that. Some people claim that they see darkness and shadow beings, and it's a very scary place, hellish, if we could use that term. Have you, or could you go into detail about maybe somebody who you have studied who really didn't want to experience death after having that?
Well, the 2 cases that I had talked about earlier tonight, they were scary experiences for them, but they still were transformed by them in a positive way. And one person, the person I had mentioned who had experienced some abuse, she felt like at the end of that experience, she did see something positive. She actually she was traveling down a tunnel, and she saw faces of tormentors and tormented beings, and then at the end of it, she saw a light that she started accelerating towards. So for her, that was positive. And unfortunately for the other patient, she did have some uncomfortable experiences and was afraid of the death process. But we actually had I'd experienced enough with other patients by then that I talked to her about the vast majority of patients have positive experiences, and that what she had was unfortunate, but that the majority of the news that people bring back is that it's positive and loving. And it actually ended up with her being, even though it was an uncomfortable and hellish type experience, she moved forward from that, living in a more positive way and in a more in a kinder way. So it had the positive impact of, even though she was still a bit skittish about her ultimate death at some point in the future, it did motivate her to try to live differently and more loving and more kind.
Did anybody ever relay any trips to hell? Because we always seem to hear these heavenly type stories.
I've not experienced that. I've not heard anyone say that I've taken care of. I have heard a couple of accounts of that at different conferences that I've spoken at. But, you know, I certainly have morphed over the course of my career in this exploration as far as my belief systems. And my personal thought is that we kind of do have an impact on the kind of experience that we have next. That I think that lady's motivation and my personal philosophy to transform her life now from that hellish experience probably will have an impact on her experience of death when she finally does die. That's a little bit of my personal philosophy bleeding in, but I want to think that people who've had those hellish experiences, that even that is kind of guided from a higher space for them to experience something that will be life-altering and still have a positive outcome.
When you have so many of these experiences recorded, have you noticed patterns forming? Have you noticed similar type experiences? Or are they really so different that every experience is to each their own?
Yeah, I try to make a practice of maintaining the individuality of people's experiences. And I don't actively do near-death experience research. I mean, I'm a story collector, and I collect people's experiences. And so I don't necessarily look for threads. I have noticed that there is such a variety of experiences. And I become uncomfortable when I am at conferences where we try to categorize these experiences too rigidly. I was at a conference this year where there was a strong emphasis from one speaker to say, well, it's not a near-death experience unless you could tick these boxes. And that made me incredibly uncomfortable, because that's being kind of, that's almost like turning the near-death experience into a religion. And that would be a shame if we excluded some people's experiences as being invalid because they didn't fit a certain description. So I have heard a broad variety of experiences, and I intentionally try not to kind of force them into categories, but just hold it pretty lightly. Again, people talk a lot about, when they mention near-death experiences, talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. I've had very few people who've had tunnel experiences and moving toward a tunnel, through a tunnel of light. And that's really kind of curious to me, that if this is something that is so widely associated with the near-death experience, that I just wouldn't hear it that often.
Catherine is asking, by collecting all of these experiences then, what is your end goal for the information you gather?
Well, I've actually already accomplished that goal. I mean, my goal was to write a book that I thought contributed something to the conversation. My personal goal was, what motivated it is I really just got frustrated with hearing my colleagues say to patients, that didn't really happen. You have to understand you were very sick and the brain can do funny things. Because I think we are, at this point in our evolution, talking about something that we can't prove does or does not exist. So we need to be having a different conversation around, if we can't prove that it did or didn't exist, how can we support you in your experience and listen to it and validate it for what it means to you. So that I've already accomplished that goal. I will continue to ask patients, did anything unusual happen when you died? But beyond that, I actually, have other goals that I would like to write about around the patient experience. But that really is what I revolve around, is what anomalous experiences mean to patients, and really have become an advocate for making sure that patients understand that this is part of good patient care. And if you really care, and most doctors do care about good patient care, and that this can be a part of it.
Have you ever had the opportunity to see before and after near-death experience CAT scans or other diagnostic imaging?
I have, because I, typically whenever patients come into our trauma center, they have a, head-to-toe CAT scan, and then we are getting follow-up scans. But I haven't noticed any anatomical differences. My suspicion is that any difference, brain structure differences, would probably be microscopic and maybe even biochemical, and that would be kind of hard to pick up on a scan. But I think, excuse me, I think that if patients are transformed by these experiences, I think that it has to affect them on a cellular level, and so that would be really interesting to see if they were able to, take biopsies, like brain biopsies, and compare before and after cellular structure and chemical content. That's a great question, actually, because it really does kind of spark some curiosity along those lines.
Have you ever had a chance to speak to famous NDE experiencers? The one that's coming to name right now is Danny and Brinkley, who has been a guest on this show, where he's had 2 or 3, and apparently he was just a real badass back in the day, but it really enlightened him and changed his entire focus in life in now treating people with respect and helping people rather than beating them up. Have you ever...
Yeah. I've run across him and others at conferences, and I think I love hearing those stories, because I think that is, that's the power of these experiences for most people, is that they are transformed in a positive way, and they're just kinder. I think that, if everybody could have an NDE, it'd probably be a kinder world, and certainly more peaceful. But his story in particular is pretty fantastic, and how he was just, totally transformed.
We'll continue with some questions here. Joe is asking, I've heard people see dead relatives during an NDE. I saw a very alive female during my experience. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I mean, it actually, what comes to mind is an experience of a patient who was actually near death, not from a sudden event, but was actually someone that we were contemplating transitioning to hospice. And he reported being transported to his mother's home and seeing his mother, who was still living. And yeah, I mean, now that I think about it, I've had another patient who kept seeing a person that seemed to be very real, not a dead relative, but just someone that that she could identify as seeming to be, flesh and blood, not very ethereal at all, but solid matter. And it was somebody that we could never see. And she was lucid. She wasn't delusional. She wasn't having delirium, and that was kind of curious to me, and curious to the patient too. She said, "I have no idea who this person is, but I keep seeing them."
In a lot of families, and maybe it's just coincidence, we see scenarios all the time where a relative passes away just as a newborn is about to come into this world, and there seems to always be this flowing transition of deceased relative to newborn addition. Do you see, or have you discussed at any time or heard of anybody having that near-death experience and seeing children coming from the future? that will be born in the future.
Oh, yeah. I describe one in my book. This was actually a nurse that I worked with. This was not a patient, but she was sharing a story with us of where she died in labor and was resuscitated for close to an hour. And they had already told her husband that she wasn't going to make it. And she actually described to us going to a space where she saw several relatives of hers who had died, and then she saw this child, and she knew this child by name. She knew that the child would actually have some difficulties, like some mental difficulties, and she didn't say a word to anybody because she felt like this child was going to be born to her daughter. That's what she was told when she died. And years later, her daughter gave birth to a child that had autism and had some sensory integration type difficulties where loud noises would bother her. And but her name was Crystal. That's what her daughter named her, and that was something that she had seen like 21 years before it happened, of a child that was going to be born. And I think that's an amazing story, and that she had she kept it to herself. She didn't tell anyone that part of it. And more of it is that she wasn't sure that was real until it happened.
You know what? That blows me away. And you know what? I have practiced the art of channeling since I started having my own experiences. And when I was learning how to channel, I didn't expect to actually channel my son before he was born. And my wife was about 5 months pregnant at that time, 6 months pregnant. And the conversation this little guy and I had, I knew it was a boy, and that he told me he was going to piss me off early in life. And Lord knows he does that already, because he is such a mama's boy, and I'm not even a novelty candy. You know, he's just all about mom and dad. Well, you just worry over there. But every now and again, I get a big hug and a kiss. He'll be 4 in just 22 days. So, you know, it's kind of funny how that kind of situation is planned out, almost exactly like what you were saying about the child that was born in the future 21 years later with autism. So so there has to be some sort of etheric connection between the ET, between the NDE, pardon me, not the ET, the NDE, the OBE, the channeling sensation to a higher spiritual self.
You know, I've just, like I said, this whole journey has really kind of informed my personal belief system, and I've come to the personal conclusion that I think that energy and existence is very fluid and kind of manifests itself in different ways, almost like an energy that exists and desires to be expressed in a certain way, either human or alien or different energy systems, whether it's physical worlds or etheric worlds. So that's what has kind of helped me make sense of some of these seemingly random experiences that people will, again, an unfortunate human habit is we try to categorize and separate them, where I think it may be kind of a more homogeneous soup, part of a more homogeneous soup than we realize. Personal opinion.
So when you look at everything, if you were ahead of a university where you were studying near-death experience, how would you lay out a timetable or a chart in order to graph the study first and foremost, but the experience as the second part?
A study of the phenomena of near-death experiences, or
and OBEs, because we do we do admit there is some sort of correlation between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that people who are in charge of universities are much smarter than I am, so they are a little bit more well equipped to design that kind of study. But I think the smartest thing to do, and I think it's what good researchers do, is just start gathering information. Just start talking to experiencers and just try to notice trends. And then I think that, again, I don't think that we have the technology to adequately reproduce that or capture data that, like a poor analogy would be like a thermal camera picks up on energy imprints that we can't see with the naked eye. If we could ever develop the technology where we could record, consciousness and what we would perceive as an apparition of ourselves, I think that would be key in kind of documenting these experiences. But I think in our current system, we are pretty limited to just recording experiential data until we're smart enough to figure out a way to record these energy experiences.
Is there the technology to record it, though?
Not that I know of. I think that, probably the closest that we can come to it is, some EEG recording. But again, that's just recording the human experience, what the body's experiencing. I think that people have tried to do this with meditators and doing the active PET scans and active MRIs. To see what the brain is doing while they're having psychic experiences or mystical experiences. So I think I'm not sure, I'm not aware of a technology we have that could actually record, people's near-death experiences or, what they are actually seeing and experiencing. I think we're limited to kind of studying indirectly what's happening to the physical world around us while people are experiencing that.
Do you believe, and I realize we touched on the whole religion side of everything, but do you believe that different cultures buy into this standard? So a hospital where you work at, could it be the same type of experiences happening over in Singapore or China or somewhere in Africa? Do you think it's all one big experience, one big Zen moment, or because they are in different countries, that they could be a little bit different?
I think they are. I think that, these experiences, again, speaking of an unfortunate human habit, we are programmed to interpret what we experience through our culture and our personalities. One of my favorite quotes, and I can't remember who said it, but I use it often when I do presentations, when I do talks. What we see is what we believed before we looked.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we actually perceive is really informed by what we actually believed before we perceived it. And I think that there's some near-death researchers that have done work in India, and it's incredibly informed by their predominantly Hindu belief system. And my experience with Hmong patients is that it's very influenced by their connection to ancestors, what they experience. And so I think just because we are cultural beings and we are, humans have naturally gravitate toward a belief system. I mean, anthropology certainly substantiates that, is that we try to make sense of the world through our culture and our belief systems. And so if we have an anomalous experience, we can't help but interpret it in a way that uses the vocabulary that we have, and that vocabulary being, influences of the society around us.
Have you ever had the opportunity to put something, a target, in or where the person would have to see it from above to know it's there if they are having an experience?
Yeah, I've never done that. That's not where my my curiosity tends to lie. Again, I'm more interested in just hearing patients' personal experience. But there are institutions who have done that, and with limited success, because you just can't predict who's going to die in what room. You can't do it. And it is in the intensive care unit. Probably people are more likely to have a death experience. But that's not something I've done. But I have a lot of respect for people who do that, though, and trying to just be very formulaic about collecting data. That may be a direction that we head one day in our medical institutions.
I just thought of this question, and I don't know why, but a minute ago you were talking about studying this NDEs in the Hindu culture, but that brings in the whole part of reincarnation. So my imagination gets going, and I think, wow, they're exiting one world and they're entering a new one with the reincarnation, just like that. So maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is actually a rebirth.
Maybe. It's a very intriguing thought, and I love thinking about things like that because it's so engaging to think about what all this means, and in terms of the energy of our own existence, kind of going on to other lifetimes is comforting, actually, and certainly could be one way to interpret the tunnel. That's kind of interesting.
Well, I could tell you this. I don't want to reincarnate that quick. I really don't.
You need a moment.
Yeah, I may need a moment at the bar in heaven to grab a drink and say, well, that was intense.
And kind of deal with the fact that you now are a vegan.
That hurt.
And you've
really,
been deprived of... Did that hurt?
You too? You too now? I thought we built up this host/guest experience,
and then it all disintegrates, right?
All because of vegan bacon. That's right. All because of vegan bacon. I'll wish that upon your soul as well. Question for you, if you don't mind. Have you ever had a patient of non-Christian belief ever claim to have met Jesus Christ in a near-death experience?
I have not. I've certainly heard of that, that people from different belief systems will encounter figures representative of other belief systems. I tend to, my patient population tends to kind of experience things through their own spiritual tradition. What's interesting to me is that many of my patients, actually, even if they have a strong religious structure that they're a part of, most of them didn't experience it in the context of their faith, which I think is very interesting and worthy of attention. That maybe that there probably is something more universal than our little boxes that we try to put, make sense of the world through. But in my book, I really don't talk a lot about religious experiences. And one of the nurses who had read my book that I work with said, "You didn't talk a lot about Jesus in your book." I'm like, neither did they. I really worked hard to make this a non-religious book and make it more about kind of a universal experience. And that actually is my belief system, that we tend to try to take these experiences that are probably more universal and kind of force them through the lens of a religion.
BTO is asking, do you believe NDEs are based on the reincarnational universal cycle?
I don't know that. I don't think so in my own personal belief. I'm not sure it's part of a reincarnation cycle. It may well be, and I could be totally wrong, but I think the neat thing about them is that it makes us all think these things and wonder and try to make sense of it. And I certainly have come to believe that there is a reincarnation cycle, but I haven't quite been able to tie the NDE to that. But it may be that I'm just not smart enough to do it, and it could all be related. I certainly believe that there is, a thread of connection to all these experiences. But it's now I'll have to go think about that.
Do you ever see yourself then, Dr. Laurin, maybe in the future giving up some of your practice, that what you do, to study and research this full time? Do you think it will ever become that sort of passion?
Not for me. I mean, my passion is medicine. I love taking care of patients. I actually enjoy working with their families in the intensive care unit. I enjoy being in that what I consider pretty sacred space when they are, so vulnerable. I feel like it's something I was always meant to do. I do feel like I was meant to pay attention to the near-death phenomenon, but I don't feel that researching it has a draw for me. I really respect the people who feel that passion deep in their soul to research it, but I really enjoy being at the bedside with patients because I really do enjoy the component of, taking care of sick human beings. But part of that for me is expanded to include their near-death experiences. So that's my vantage point, is I see it very much as a tool in my tool bag of providing comprehensive patient care.
Have you ever, and I'm sure you have, sat with a patient as they breathe their last dying breath, maybe, painting a picture here, you're holding their hand because there's no family around and you want to make sure that they're not alone. Do you ever get to experience some of what they are experiencing or hear what they are doing at that time of death?
No, I've personally not had that experience. I've have had some unusual experiences around patients dying. One of them happened not too long ago, within the past couple of months. People experience grief and death in different ways, and we had a patient who was dying, and there was nothing we could do to prevent that. And the relatives, the mother and the wife and the daughter, just didn't feel like they could be at the bedside, but they didn't want him to die alone, so they asked us to be in there. And I was, so a nurse and I just kind of sat in there, and we were just chit-chatting, just because we didn't know how, once we took the ventilator off, he didn't die right away. And so we were just honoring the family's request and just keeping vigil. And I have no idea what we were talking about. It was not about him in particular. It was just more light conversation. And then when he passed, we pronounced him deceased, documented the time, and then I went back to the workstation and started typing up my note, my death summary. And I thought somebody was behind me. I kept seeing, out of my peripheral vision, I kept seeing like a tall shadow. And my sense of things, I don't know if this is correct or not, but I felt like it was probably the presence of that person who had just passed. So I just took a moment and, just tried to, connect him with, love and light and God and, whatever connected for him to go there, to go to that space. And then he disappeared. But that was a very vivid experience of just feeling like, my interpretation of it is that he was just needed a little guidance. Whether that was what really was happening or not, I certainly could. If I looked directly at it, I couldn't see it. But if I was looking out of my peripheral vision, I could see kind of off to my left shoulder a tall shadow. Very faint, but it was there.
Gotta love when that happens. Gotta love when that happens.
It's only happened once, but it was really pretty spectacular.
Come over to my house. I'll show you the Kmart blue light special of the weird. Last night, true story, last night, when I went outside during one of the breaks, it's been widely known in my area that there's fairies flying around. And a lot of people will say, oh, come on, Dave, don't give us this crap. But last night I went out during one of the breaks to take my dog out to do his business, and I actually saw little orbs of, like, bright white light, maybe the size of a dime, shooting around and flying around by my garden. 3 of them.
That's interesting.
We don't get lightning bugs up here in British Columbia. I only saw lightning bugs for the first time about 7-8 years ago. I traveled to meet some friends in Pittsburgh, of all places, and all of a sudden I'm like, what the hell is that? And they're like, what? And I'm like, that thing that just lit up in the sky. It was like, I was like 35, 36 years old, and I go running through the grass like a kid trying to catch lightning bugs because I'd never seen them before.
Interesting.
It was one of those.
Well, I mean, that kind of confirms your experience because you don't have them where you are.
I know. British Columbia doesn't have them. Does not have them all. We get ripped off here, but we got Sasquatch, so that's okay.
That's really fascinating, though. It's cool that you had that experience.
Yeah, I thought so, as you roll your eyes and say that. But that's okay.
No, that's fascinating to me, really. I'm not rolling my eyes. I think that's really... if you stop and think about all the phenomena around us, I really believe that once you start paying attention, you will notice things. And that's been my experience, is that the more I pay attention, the more I notice things. And I'm not sure that I would have seen, a shadow of a deceased man off to my left shoulder 20 years ago. But I do now because I'm a little bit more aware. And I'm wondering, if maybe you saw that because you're a little bit more aware, just by doing this radio show.
Could be. Do you find yourself, since you have these experiences, that you are becoming more intuitive yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, that's not something I talk about in my book because that wasn't the focus of it, but I'm working on another book now where I actually do kind of broaden it and talk a little bit more about some of the experiences that we have in the ICU that are not necessarily near-death related, but in that I'm sharing a couple of cases where I had a strong sense of intuition and it ended up being correct. And my personal belief is that because I'm just paying more attention, that's kind of opened the way to pay attention to some psychic phenomenon, some intuitions that may have been there all along, but I just wasn't giving it any energy. But one of the neatest experiences I had of that was I had admitted a lady to the hospital who was having a flare of her emphysema and was having trouble breathing. And whenever I walked in to admit her, I just had this overwhelming sense of knowing that she had ovarian cancer. Couldn't explain it, and it was just like I had just walked into this cloud of knowledge that her body was exuding. And I'm struggling to even describe what I experienced, but that's how it felt. And just kind of walking into her energy. And she was not there for that reason. So it's I had no way to justify exploring that medically. And she was a thin lady, so when I did her exam, I was just kind of, pressing down on her lower abdomen, just trying to see if there was a mass there, and there wasn't. And so I found myself in a little bit of a dilemma because it was a piece of knowledge that had latched onto me beyond my ability to explain it or justify it, and would not let go. And so what I eventually decided is I would order a blood test. There is a blood test that where we can detect an antigen associated with ovarian cancer. So I thought, well, I'll order that, and if it's negative, I'll pay for it. If it's positive, the insurance company will pick it up. And so that's how I dealt with it, because I didn't feel comfortable saying to her at that time, I have this weird thought you may have ovarian cancer. I mean, that just seemed ludicrous. So I ordered the blood test, and it was positive. And what I ended up telling her is, our workup has raised some concerns that you might have ovarian cancer, and we're going to get a CAT scan. And so we got a CAT scan, and she did have, a small mass on her ovary, and that ended up being positive, and it was a surgical cure, because it was in the early stages. And so that is something, I have a couple of instances like that where just since I've been asking the question, I've been more curious about human phenomenon, where I've actually had more experiences myself, and I'm writing those in the book, a book that I'm working on now that I hope will be out in early 2018.
Well, when you get that book out, we got to have you back on this show. We only got about 5 minutes left with you here, Doc. And
wow, that went by fast.
I know, but I want to get a couple of questions in here.
Sure.
Lulu Bell at hashtag Spaced Out Radio has a great question, because I think we're all pet lovers. Did anyone who you spoke with who's had NDE say that they saw their pets that have passed away?
Yes. Absolutely. I've had, that's actually not uncommon. It's not something that I focus on, as far as the book that I wrote, but I have had some patients talk about seeing their pets who have passed on when they had their near-death experience. I think that's wonderful, because I think about my animals and how I hope that we have a connection that transcends death.
It is. Me too. Eric is asking, how do you personally reconcile the scientist in you with the experiencer?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. It's actually been very easy for me. I've not really struggled. You mentioned, I think your brother or
cousin,
someone you know,
my cousin,
your cousin who is a doctor, and how he just really struggles with kind of reconciling, the scientific with the experience. And I have just never struggled with that, and I chalk it up to my personality. I mean, I'm intensely curious about most anything that crosses my path. And whenever I first had that experience with my very first patient, 20 years ago, who had the out-of-body experience, I was so curious about that. And I was comfortable with the fact that I didn't have the science to explain it. But it just kind of drew me in and just took me on this journey of exploring what in the heck was that. So I've not really found it that existentially difficult to embrace the fact that there are things that we just can't explain.
I think it's great that you don't struggle with it. I think that's honorable that you, in your position of helping people, have, been able to keep your mind open to the realm of possibility, because that is so rare.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm thankful that I don't, because that has allowed me to really expand and explore, and I've had some really interesting experiences with my family, and one of my daughters in particular, who is very interested in paranormal sort of topics, and it's really allowed us to have a really nice relationship around these kind of explorations.
Well, do I have a show for her to listen to? I'm just saying, I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah.
If she needs to learn, I can teach her.
She would love this show.
Excellent. I think the question of the night comes from Marcus at hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and I love this question. And I don't usually ask these types of questions because I try and keep the severity and the seriousness of the topics going, but this one's brilliant. He says, I wonder if dead people ever have a near-life experience.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go think about that, because I love that question.
Great question, Marcus. Thank you so much. Dr. Laurin Bellg, I need a favor before you leave. I need you to tell my listeners where they can pick up your book, when they can expect your new book, and all about your website.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so my book is available on Amazon.com and also on BarnesandNoble.com. My website is Laurin Bellg, my first and last name.com, and it's Laurin with an I, LaurinBellg. And I have a blog on WordPress that's also you can connect to through my website. I'm not as active on the blog as I would like to be, and you can also email me through my website. I really like to interact with people, and I do answer emails. It may take me a while to get back, just because I get quite a few, but I love interacting with people in that way. And my next book, the working title is At the Edge, Medicine, Mystery, and Stories of the Soul, and that's due out in the spring of 2018.
Well, we're bringing you back for that. Thank you
Terrific.
so much for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight, Doc. You hold on. I'm going to wrap this thing up. If you're listening in on our terrestrial radio side, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rockin' Little Brother is watching as Mr. Bumblefoot brings us in and takes us home every single night on this program. Tomorrow night on the show, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, our Keith Andrews is back with his monthly feature, The ET Connection, at spacedoutradio.com. I want to thank my team for helping me put this together. Lana Scott, the personal assistant, Everett Thiemer, Eric Markham, Encounter Online, Jolene Lammers, web design, Catherine James, social media, our great intro voice, Bob Davis, Director of Business Affairs, Kim Gandy, and in sales, Thomas Evidence McGowan. I can't do it without them. Make sure you give them a thanks if you see them on social media or in the chat rooms as well. Don't forget, head to our website, spacedoutradio.com. Check out our store. You can get tickets right now for the September 29th to October 1st Caribou Paracon in 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. I want to see you there. Get your discount VIP passes now at spacedoutradio.com. Remember, friends, tell a friend about this show, and together we will own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, take us home.